Screen. All right, welcome back to part two with Shelby Mast, Bracket WAG. We still got to get to whatever the heck WAG stands for. That'll be one of our questions later. If you missed part one, we went through ACC, Big 12, Big East, Big 10, Mountain West. We're going to do SEC and the mid-majors now, which includes Pac-12, which is definitely a mid-major this year. And then we'll get to some questions. Hopefully we can have some time to talk Houston and UConn in the order on the one lines, because I think that has gotten very interesting. And certainly we'll get to our last four in, first four out as always. But Graham, take over this SEC discussion for us.
Looking at the SEC, we have four teams that are locked in. Tennessee, who is, in my opinion, a pretty firm 2 seed, but I could see the committee giving them serious consideration for the one line right now. Alabama. Alabama's an interesting one. They have really struggled against quad one, but they had already struggled against quad one when the committee put them ninth overall at the bracket reveal. Right. So curious what the two of you think about Alabama. Where do you think they are currently on the seed list?
I've still got them as a top three. I know it was a bad loss to Kentucky, but I don't think that it was enough to move them down. Baylor, that had won yesterday, definitely, but they lost. Iowa State won yesterday, but they lost during the week. So I just don't think it was enough. I'm pretty set with them right there.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat where I would like to drop them, but Duke lost, Creighton lost, Baylor lost. I mean, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that's been holding Alabama back a little bit for me is that Ohio State neutral court loss, and now that's not looking so bad. So that's, I think, maybe something that could help them out a little bit. Their strength of schedule has been really, really good. So I think Alabama's still firmly on the 3 line. I have them 10th overall. I think Iowa State has passed them at this point. But again, Iowa State, same situation they were in previously. Bad non-conference strength of schedule, and actually Iowa State's gotten a pretty favorable Big 12 schedule as well. They only have Kansas and Houston as home wins in the TCU sweep that really stand out. The rest of the resume is just okay. So not a ton of great wins for Iowa State, despite the really good record and playing out of the Big 12. So I think it's really close between Alabama and Iowa State for 9th overall. And who knows, that could end up being pretty crucial because we could get into some issues for geography. And I don't necessarily mean who gets the closer region. It could be who gets shipped out to the West region, because it's 9th. I could definitely see the committee needing to balance the regions and deciding this 9th team perfectly should head out West and make it so it all the math checks out. So in a weird way, it could be better to be 10th.
This is where Arizona dropping to 5 overall just makes everything easier.
We have Auburn on there. Kentucky, obviously Auburn struggled against quad one as well. Kentucky,
1-6.
117 points. My goodness. Where do you guys have the Cats? I think they're a really interesting team to see at this point.
I've got them 5th, 5 seed, number 19 overall. I'm torn. Some days I think they could be higher, and some days I think lower. But they're not consistent enough, but they're not healthy enough. They get healthy with enough time left where all the guys can play together for a few games. Watch out. They're going to be tough in the tournament.
It's interesting that you said you have them 5th, you have them as a 5 seed, because that's how I feel. They're a 5 seed. I think they're probably the 5th best team in the country.
Yeah.
But resume wise, I think they're probably a 5 seed, even though they have 4 quad 1A wins. They've just they're very Florida Atlantic-y to me, where they just play to the level of their competition, kind of. I mean, that game against Auburn last week was very impressive. That game against Alabama on Saturday, very impressive. And then they just, aside from Rob Dillingham, didn't give a shit against LSU. That's just been their whole season.
And they got that early season, was it quad 3 home loss
to UNC Wilmington?
Yeah. That's I don't think that is a horrible loss, because UNC Wilmington, they're competing for the CAA, but on paper that's bad.
Yeah. Why did you finger Alabama and Kentucky, Graham, instead of you're just glossing over Auburn being 1-6 against quad one. Like that's the team I can't figure out where to seed. I don't
I
want Auburn
mentioned
as a
their
4
quad one
seed.
record. Frankly, I've been putting Auburn and Alabama in that same boat for a while of having that really bad quad one record. But I think Kentucky's more interesting to me because I feel like Auburn's they're a 4 seed right now, right? Do you guys have them anywhere but a 4 seed?
I do. I hate it. But I was surprised that the committee had Alabama and Auburn so far apart because going into it, we were talking like, well, wherever you have Alabama, you got to have Auburn right behind them.
Right.
They've been kindred spirits, as we've talked about before, where it's because they won games against each other at home that they even have quad one wins. But yeah, both of them are very, I think, vulnerable to fall, even though their metrics are so. I mean, they're obviously locks to get in, but
Yeah.
if they were to collapse down the stretch, I could see them getting like a 7 or an 8 seed.
So Kentucky, kind of going back to that discussion, why I find them so interesting to seed is for all the reasons we've already talked about, but also, do you know how many wins they have against quads 1 and 2 combined? Off the top of your head, what do you think it is?
Well, I just looked. It's
10.
6.
Oh.
6, right? We're almost in March, and Kentucky has 6 wins against the first 2 quadrants. It's not great. It's really not great.
But how many opportunities?
So they're
Yeah, I think
6 and 7.
Okay, 13.
They're getting some. They have a losing record against the first 2 quads, and that is combined with a home loss to UNC Wilmington. So I do feel like they look like a national champion so often, and they have held their own in quad 1A. When they are playing the best teams, that tends to be when they show up the best.
Yeah.
But there's got to be something done about the lack of quality wins in general. So I have them 18th overall. And I'm just having a hard time seeing them moving up to the 4 line unless they do some real good work, just because they just don't have enough quality wins.
Yeah, they've got, like I said, they've got the 4 quad 1A wins, and exactly like you said, just 6 total wins, quad 1 and 2. So it's like, I would like to drop them because they are sub 500. They only have those 6 wins, but what are you going to do? Put St. Mary's as a 5, Dayton as a 5? Like I can't. It's the same thing with Texas Tech that we were talking about earlier. It's a weird spot where you just get to a point where you like around like 10 or 11 overall is when you start thinking about, oh, I kind of want to put Kentucky here, but you just keep keeping them down until you get to around 18 or 19.
So moving on to the feel good category here, we have Florida and South Carolina. What do you think about those two?
Florida, I like a lot. I had them up as high as a 7 seed about 3 weeks ago, and I had Florida fans saying, "Whoa, we're not that good yet, are we?" I said, I think that's good, but I scrubbed them and they fell back to a 9, but I have them today as a 6. They just keep playing good games, and they've got no losses outside of quad 1. And now they have some meat on their bones with some quad 1 wins. They're looking pretty salty. I won't be surprised if they bump up to a 5 by tournament time.
Yeah, I have them at 20 overall right now. They're my last 5 seed. And yeah, like you said, they don't have any bad losses. I think both Florida and South Carolina are similar in that they have 2 really good wins. I think they both won at home against Kentucky. I forget what Florida's other quad 1A win is, but I know South Carolina won at Tennessee. South Carolina, I'm a little more iffy on because they have a couple of bad losses and they have a remaining schedule where things could get a little bit ugly. That's the only reason I feel like they're both very close to locks. Like I don't see them falling to bubble. I see them going to locks sooner than later. But
I've got them
I
as
think
locks.
I think they're both pretty comfortably in.
I think if they lose the remainder of their games, they're still getting in.
So
there's not many left.
So I guess one thing that's really starting to maybe crystallize in my mind is we might spend some more time talking about Florida next week than we anticipated. And the reason why I say that is no metric worse than 28 in their resume or predictive metrics. Net's 31. But I think the metrics indicate that this team should be a top 7 seed. But they don't have a great Quad 1 record. They only have 3 wins against the field. Carry, it was Auburn, at Kentucky, and then Mississippi State at home. Good wins.
Yeah.
Everybody seemingly beats Auburn at home.
I think you've said that like 6 consecutive pods.
And it's always true, right? Like every time they go on the road, and it just keeps happening. It's like, you guys want to prove this wrong? Go out and beat somebody on the road. But they
I
keep
don't
losing
like
those
the
games.
I don't like the Florida coach. He looks like a soccer coach to me. He looks like he should be on the sidelines with Ted Lasso.
Says the tennis guy.
Yes.
I think Florida will be an interesting discussion point because I can see them in such a wide range of overall seeds. Usually at this point, I feel like I've gotten teams pretty closely to where they're going to be. In Florida, I don't have a good grasp on them yet, so could be interesting to see what happens with them.
I could see them being. There's that weird bracketing principle where, like, if a team gets selected but then doesn't get seeded for 2 consecutive rounds or whatever, they get put back in consideration or whatever. I don't know that it's ever come up for us in the couple of years that we've done this, but I could see that happening with Florida, where we'll get to around the 5 seeds and be like, yeah, I think Florida's close, but then we never actually vote them in, and then we just throw them back into consideration.
Yeah, I think they're one of those teams where you look at it metrically and you're like, oh yeah, they should be around this range, and then you start to look at them, you're like, I don't really want to pick them though. Like I think that's a good point, Gary. Moving on to the tiny bubbles area, we've got Mississippi State, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss. Mississippi State to me seems to be pretty close to feel good at this point. I think they're in good shape. What about Texas A&M and Ole Miss?
Texas A&M is out for me, and they were close last night going into the Tennessee game. Coming out, they fell further. They just don't look like they care. And I talked to a Texas A&M fan today. He said A&M needs to focus on golf and tennis and baseball and just forget the other sports.
I think with these 3, we are kind of running the gauntlet on the range of the tiny bubbles, because like you're saying, Graham, Mississippi State is clearly at the top of this trio. They are close to feeling good. I think my reluctance to bump them up is that though they are on a 5-game winning streak, none of those individual games mattered at all. It's just that they didn't lose. That's why they're kind of climbing up while all the other bubble teams are losing. I still think they're iffy. They still have that horrible home loss to Southern and a bad loss to Georgia Tech. They didn't have Tolu Smith for either of those games. He was out the first 12 games. That could be an injury conversation that comes up, but I think they are about as comfortably in as Wake Forest is right now. Texas A&M is my second team out. As I was saying earlier, if I didn't have both Richmond and South Florida as auto bids, Villanova and Texas A&M would be in. And Ole Miss is like near the bottom of this bubble conversation at this point. Who did they even lose to yesterday? But it knocked them down. Yeah,
South Carolina at home.
They needed that because they needed to keep their results-based metrics up, and it didn't.
Right. I've got them as my last team in, and that's just lack of options for other teams.
Shelby and I are exactly in the same position. I fully expected Ole Miss to be out, and then I just couldn't find anybody that I wanted to put in. So it's almost like a holding position for Ole Miss. I don't think they're going to hold it. I think they're going to drop out. But right now, you dig into the resume, it's still not that bad. It's really not. It's okay.
It's not. It's not bad, but it's not good. They're 4-8 against quads 1 and 2.
But everybody outside of the bracket is also not good. So
I know.
You're just choosing between a bunch of bad options at this point.
I've been pointing at Ole Miss's results-based metrics for 2 months straight now. Like, how can you leave this team out? But now they're down to around 40th in that average. And I don't think that's an automatic. They got to be in anymore. I think the lack of any quad 1A wins is really going to hurt them.
Do you think that the committee will punish Chris Beard for actions last year? Since they didn't get to last year?
I think Ole Miss is going to be out because they're not going to have enough quality wins. Yeah. But right now, they're in position where I could see them. If the committee met today, I could see the committee. It depends on what the auto bids look like. But if we didn't have those extra auto bids, I could see them getting in just based on the fact that they do still have some wins over tournament teams. It's not just like it's all about avoiding bad losses. They have that too, but they do have wins against tournament teams too.
And they started off 13-0. That's got to count.
And that at UCF win looks better than we thought it was going to.
Yeah.
That's actually a pretty good win.
Here, keep talking about them. I'm going to pull up their resume real quick. Now that they're 76th in net, I have to scroll way down to find them. I think that's, at least with Rutgers, they had 5 quad 1A wins. So they have a home win over Mississippi State, which is, again, probably like a 10 seed right now. Their other 2 quad 1 wins at Texas A&M, at UCF. We don't think either of them are in. A home win over Florida is their only quad 2 win. I don't see it. I know they don't have any bad losses at all. At LSU is their only loss outside of the top 50, but I don't know. But the committee does always seem to find a reason to put in one more SEC team. The SEC was what was it? Vanderbilt was the 15-loss team in 2017. Alabama was the 15-loss team in 2018. Florida was the 15-loss team in 2019. I remember there was one year that Georgia had no wins against the RPI top 50, so showing how far back we're going. I was like, there's no way they're getting in, and they got a 10 seed. So maybe they are this year's SEC team that just gets that love, but I don't even have them among my first 4 out anymore.
Speaking of being out, I thought you would scrub LSU off at this point, but you still think they got a shot, huh?
Yeah, I probably just didn't look at them. I put this together at 2:30 a.m. last night, but yeah, they're 90th in net. They at least do have a couple of quad 1A wins. One, Wake Forest, they beat Kentucky, South Carolina, Texas A&M. Yeah, they're probably dead. I could probably erase them, but I'll be generous. I'll leave them on.
Just see if LSU
so we have. Moving on to the Pac-12 and other category.
Yes.
Arizona, I think, is one of those teams that we could all see getting a 1 seed or possibly not getting 1 seed, but we all agree they're going to be a 1 or a 2, right? Like I've been thinking about the list of teams who maybe are in contention to be top 16 overall seeds. What do you think about this? I think Purdue, Houston, and UConn are locks to be in the top 16.
Yeah,
and then I think
they're
UNC,
locks to be ones.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think UNC, Kansas, Arizona, Tennessee, and Marquette are nearly locks. Like I can't really see any way they're falling out of the top 16.
No.
Yeah.
And then how about this? I think it starts to get a little bit more interesting here. Iowa State, Alabama, Duke. I would call them should be in. Like they should be in that final top 16. But, I can't call them like a near lock or anything. What do you think about those 3? How safe are they in the final top 16?
I think Bama and Iowa State are the safest. Duke, it all depends on Filipowski because if he's out for the year, there's not going to be a whole lot of games for them to prove that they're a good enough team. And I just wonder if that would hurt their seeding 1 to maybe 2 lines.
Are you like seeing some report that he has a torn MCL or something? What
I'm
happened?
not. No, just I mean the way that he got carried off the court yesterday.
I think he'll play Wednesday, and I'm a Duke fan. That's not me being like, oh, he's a bitch. By no means. Get rid of court storming. This is stupid.
Yes.
That he was clearly intentionally ran into, but I assume he'll be fine until we hear otherwise.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Teams that I thought were maybe in good shape, Baylor and Creighton, maybe not quite should be in, but probably in good shape to land in the top 16. What do you think about Creighton in particular following their St. John's loss? Do you think they still fall in that category?
I think so because the last 2 wins were too good in St. John's. They're on the road, a desperate bowl team. I mean, that happens.
Creighton's got 4 more quad 1, quad 2 wins than Duke has. So I think they're safer than Duke for that reason. Plus Duke could suffer more bad losses than Creighton could conference wise. So I don't know. I feel like everyone in the top 13 right now. So everybody we've mentioned thus far, I think is probably solidly going to be a 16.
Yeah.
So I got down to the bubble, and these were the teams I said were on the top 16 bubble. Auburn, San Diego State, Illinois, Wisconsin, Kentucky, and Clemson. Any teams you think should be on that list that aren't, or do you think any of those teams shouldn't be on the bubble list?
No, I'm good with those. The only other team I would add, just because the committee did, they mentioned them, Dayton. I don't think there's any way they move up from 5 seed, but
No.
I'm comfortable with them as a 5 because the committee had them.
There are two other ones I would maybe consider. St. Mary's if they win out, because their metrics are just ridiculous. And at that point, they would have 3 wins over Gonzaga. And Washington State, if they were to get a third win over Arizona, I think it would be hard to deny them a 4 seed, but they can't take any other losses between now and then either. So,
what do you think about potentially BYU? They go to Allen Fieldhouse this week. That could be a huge win for them. And Utah State, what if Utah State sneaks up there, wins that Mountain West title, maybe pulls a double regular season and tournament title? Does Utah State take San Diego State's spot in the top 16?
Well, the conference rankings and how you finish, that doesn't matter. That's what the committee says.
in theory.
To me,
yeah,
that
in
would
theory.
prove that right. That would prove that Utah State is good. It's not just numbers on paper. They are legitimately good. If you get the double whammy like that, you got to be considered for a higher seed.
I would love to see Utah State as a 4 seed, just as a gigantic middle finger to the BPI, where they are 66th right now. What the freaking BPI? But I don't see Utah State getting there. I don't think they have the marquee wins, even though they've gotten obviously some quad 1 wins in Mountain West play. I just don't think they've done enough. But what you said about BYU, yeah, if BYU or if Texas Tech or if even Oklahoma were to run the table, sure, they could get into the 4 seed mix for sure.
Right. But they would take that many wins.
So that tangent aside, we'll turn back to the Pac-12.
How did we get there?
Conversation. Well, I felt like we kind of owed it to Dave Oman, who asked us about our 4-5 seed cut line. So I thought this was kind of a good tangent to get that in there.
Love you, Dave.
See you in Omaha, brother. So for the feel good section, we have St. Mary's, Dayton, and Washington State. What about Washington State? They took a loss this week after a very, very big sweep over Arizona. Also a terrible non-conference schedule. Should be in good shape, but how are you feeling about Washington State seeding wise?
I've got them as a 6, and I'm comfortable with that. That loss at Arizona is coming after that massive win. There's going to be a letdown, and it just can't. It's tough to avoid that unless you're just elite. And Arizona State is scrappy. They've showed that last night. They're not a good team, but they're a scrappy team.
Yeah, classic hangover loss. I mean, that after the win at Arizona, I had them at like 18, 19. I mean, they were going to be a 5 seed, and I felt like as long as they didn't lose all of their remaining games, I mean, literally all of them at Arizona State versus USC versus UCLA versus Washington and the Pac-12 opener, whoever they play in that, they'll be fine. So they lost the first of those 5 games. As long as they win one of these 3 in Pullman, I think they'll get in. I agree with Shelby. They're a 6 seed right now, and I find it very hard to believe they could fall out at this point, but I'm being very, very conservative by not putting them as a lock yet.
One thing that catches my attention with Washington State, they've played 12 games at home against teams that are worse than 100 in the net. I wonder if the committee is going to do something about that the same way that they seemingly did something with Iowa State to show them maybe teach them a lesson. And there's been some interesting comments about non-conference schedules, and maybe 9-9 won't be enough to get it done if that's what you do in conference after a bad non-conference schedule. So I'm curious to see if the committee tries to send a message this year that non-conference schedules aren't just about making the field. They're also about your seating throughout the bracket.
Yeah. I think they try to send that message every year, and so me included, me mainly, pay attention to it. Look at that non-conference schedule. If it's really as bad, a plus 300 plus, then if I think they're a 4 seed, put them on the 5 line.
Here's here's the thing about trying to penalize Washington State. Looking at my overall seed list, Washington State's non-conference schedule at 23 on my seed list, they are 293 non-conference schedule. Going down from there, 306, 298, 282, 279. So like what if I'm penalizing Washington State, like
Yeah,
all those
penalize them
other
all.
teams suck too.
Yep.
So
They're
looking back at
back
your
in the
board,
conversation.
who do we have on tiny bubbles from this group?
That is Gonzaga, Colorado, James Madison, and Florida Atlantic. I moved Florida Atlantic down after that loss to Memphis. Not that it was necessarily a bad loss, but I'm officially at I don't know what the hell to do with Florida Atlantic range. I tweeted about this. I'm probably just going to average their metrics on the morning of Selection Sunday, and that's their seed.
Right.
I don't even know what to do with them.
Yeah.
Well, don't get
I,
swept would be my. I mean, that's the big thing for
yeah,
Florida Atlantic at this point. You need to win that Memphis home game
Oh
because
yeah.
Memphis still has pretty decent resume metrics. They've got some
Yeah.
decent wins. If Memphis has a sweep, I don't know that it's guaranteed Florida Atlantic's ahead of Memphis when the committee
yeah.
compares those two.
No.
So I think Florida Atlantic's still in pretty good shape, but just beat Memphis at home. That'll do a
Yeah.
lot.
I think they still have a road game against North Texas too, which is, I mean, they're not on our board, but that's not a
But yeah,
gimme.
that's not easy.
That's a tough team.
Yeah. I think James Madison, I think they've got to win their tournament because the Michigan State win is holding up metrically, but realistically, it's not.
Yeah,
That's just an okay win now.
James Madison has gotten really interesting really fast again. I mean, I wrote them off after they got swept by App State, but they haven't lost since then. Their metrics are climbing back up, and all of these other mid-major bubble teams are playing their way out. So they kind of stand out as a candidate to, if there's only one team, it's easier to take that one team. That's how I always feel like, if Indiana State and Drake, however that plays out, if there's multiple teams, maybe Madison doesn't have a case anymore. But I think they're at least in the conversation, but they are on the lower end of the bubble. I don't have them in right now, but they're like fifth,
And
seventh out, somewhere in that range.
yeah,
James Madison is starting to remind me a lot of 2019 Lipscomb. And what I mean by that is Lipscomb got a great early season road win over TCU. And then what do we see? TCU doesn't make the tournament, looking a lot like Michigan State. I actually had TCU as a 10 seed that year, kind of a similar resume to what Michigan State's putting out there this year. If Michigan State doesn't make the field, all of a sudden that big win for James Madison doesn't look so good either. So I think for James Madison, you really wanted to see Michigan State win today to give that win a little more oomph. And I don't know, without it, if that win doesn't look great, I don't think James Madison has enough.
Yeah. I agree. I got
Colorado.
10 here and barely breathing. You probably can't even see it down there. I don't know if any of these teams are actually legitimately at-large candidates anymore, but Utah, Oregon, Memphis is probably the best candidate of the bunch after their win today. Richmond, Princeton, South Florida, who we should talk about in a second, Appalachian State, McNeese State, Indiana State, Drake. I wouldn't put any of them as at-large teams
no,
right now, but
no, Missouri Valley, I think they've shot themselves in the foot. They've had all you had to do was win and get to the finals. I think they might have been, and I'll say maybe probably should be, but they've lost too many games in the stretch that it's a one bid league.
yeah.
Well, what about Colorado versus Utah? That was a big weekend result.
Mm-hmm.
I still think Utah's got an at-large quality resume, not enough for me to put them in the field, but one that I think the committee could put in the field if they were looking for more Pac-12 teams.
Why would they do that?
Yeah, don't punish us.
To me, it's very similar to what you said, Kerry, previously about the SEC. Sometimes they just find a way for these various conferences to get bids.
We're going to see if you remember back to Super 10 days. We picked, as a committee, one Pac-12 team. There was Pac-10 back then, I think. And me and one other, Dan, we were saying, nope, there is going to be at least two. It has to be two. And it ended up being two. But
like Colorado and
they found a
Washington.
bid for Cal.
Cal, that's right.
Yeah. But
again,
that was Washington won the league, right? And they didn't get at large. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Well, do you remember who Cal played in the first four that year?
VCU?
No, let's talk about the South Florida Bulls.
Yeah. Good segue. Great.
Nice segue.
So South Florida putting together a terrific overall record, kind of running away with the American title. What do you guys think about South Florida's at-large chances?
I don't think they're legit because their resume just doesn't stack up to other bubble teams. I just don't. I mean, I'd love for them to get in, but if you're looking at this, take team by team, I just don't think it stacks up. Regardless of where they finish, it doesn't. It's not good enough.
Yeah, I agree. I am not optimistic. I'm rooting for them. I'd love to see them win the AAC. I think they're a decent team, but even I looked at this today. If you take out their 2-4 start where they had that home loss to Maine and I forget their other quad 4 loss, but even if you start the season at December 3rd, like I did this on Bart Torvik, they're still only the 85th best team in the country. Like if they were really good during this 19-1 stretch, I think it's a different conversation, but they haven't even played a quad 1 game. Again,
where would you see
credit
them
to the
now?
Bulls? I have them as a 13 as an auto, but I don't even have them that close, but I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up and just do one final question here. Of all the teams listed on the feel-good category, who is the most likely to miss the NCAA tournament?
None of them. Maybe Dayton, if they were to take some bad losses, since they have no wins over the field.
Enough time left for them to. They only got 4 games left.
I know, but if they were to lose them all, I mean that's a Memphis situation.
I know, but they were a 5 seed. That put them down to 9 or 10.
Nevada's probably a good pick.
I don't think anybody, but Boise State maybe.
Yeah, went back and looked at this yesterday just to kind of see how my brackets are comparing from the past to where we are now, just to get a time frame of how much movement there might be. And last year, only 6 teams that were in my at-large, my top 46 overall, ended up moving by more than 1 seed line from where we had them at this time of the year. So if we're feeling like a team's in feel good, they're probably making the tournament. Like it is. Yeah. It would take a complete collapse at this point not to be there.
That's pretty much what that category is.
There's not enough time left for somebody way outside to make a good run.
I do think Nevada. I don't want to see it to happen. I want Nevada to make the tournament, but I do feel like feel good's a little bit generous for them at this point. If there's one team on there that I think might stub their toe.
Come on, everybody loves Steve Alford.
That was the last team I put in there. I'm not going to lie. You can see they barely even fit in there because I was not ready to put them. But we got like 3 minutes before we run out of clock here. Let's last 4 in, first 4 out. What do you got, Shelby?
Last 4 in: Wake Forest, Gonzaga, Colorado, Ole Miss. First out: Villanova, Utah, A&M, and New Mexico.
Oh, you've New Mexico out. Wow.
Yeah, I do.
Graham, what do you got?
I have in the field Virginia, New Mexico, Ole Miss, and Villanova. And I have out of the bracket Colorado, Drake, Utah, and Richmond. I do think Drake and Richmond are two of those teams that aren't going to make the field if they take that other loss. But for now, I think they look that close. But Colorado, glad to see you have them in, Shelby, because they're my first team out. I think Colorado made a big surge toward the bracket.
Yeah, last night was big.
Yeah, I got Providence, New Mexico, Gonzaga, Virginia as my last 4 in. Villanova, Texas A&M, Butler, and Colorado as my first 4 out. I agree they made a big surge. They're top 50 in all the metrics now. Where the hell did that come from?
I think for me, Texas A&M, it's not just about taking too many bad losses. Now they're just taking too many losses in general.
Yes.
I think when you combine the bad losses and the number of losses, it's just too bad.
It looks like they don't care.
Well,
I watched a big part of that game, and that's what it reminded me of.
All 3 of
There's the buzz from Shelby.
My first 3 out are all 15 and 12. Villanova, Texas A&M, and Butler. It's just like, win some games, damn it.
Yeah.
You got the quality wins, but win some games. Last question before we run out of clock. Houston or UConn? 2 versus 3. I have Houston ahead of UConn now.
I've got UConn in front of Houston.
I've got Houston above UConn. And in fact, I think Houston is making a run for that overall number 1
yes,
seed.
They are.
Let's see how they finish this year. I think they could get there.
You so crazy.
You so crazy. All right. That'll do it. Thank you, Shelby, so much for joining us. We will see you in 5 days in Omaha. Enjoy your 5 a.m. flight. We'll enjoy our lightly not as crack ass of dawn flight, but hopefully you guys can watch that all unfold on YouTube with us. It's going to be fun, but take care. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks, guys.